The initial conclusion indicated that death occurred shortly after Samantha's disappearance. The experts did not record any signs of a struggle on her hands or face, which indicated limited resistance. Samantha was probably threatened with a weapon or in a state of psychological shock. Particular attention was paid to external and internal signs that allowed establishing the exact cause of death. Doctors ruled out accidental death, suicide, and most natural factors. Despite the absence of pronounced hematomas or fractures, several traces indicated mechanical impact, most likely produced with the restrained use of force. The final conclusion: murder with the use of external pressure, incompatible with life. In addition, morgue employees confirmed, after death, the body was carefully processed. Hair combed, clothes changed, nails trimmed. Chemical-toxicological examination ruled out the influence of drugs, alcohol, or sedatives. Samantha was conscious at the time of the attack, which means she was aware of what was happening. Dear viewers, in the next video releases, you will find very intriguing and confusing cases. And in order not to miss them, be sure to subscribe to the channel and please like the video. Anchorage, Alaska. A city immersed in snow-white winters and endless twilight, living in the rhythm of nature, where every person is a part of something bigger. Here, among the snow-covered streets and harsh beauty of the north, Samantha Koenig was born and raised. She was not a famous actress or a well-known blogger, did not attract attention to herself with loud actions. And yet, for those who knew her, Samantha was the center of the world. Her life is the story of an ordinary girl with an unusually lively character, in whom it is easy to recognize her friends, daughters, sisters. Samantha was born in 1993 and from early childhood showed independence and intuition developed beyond her years. Her father, James Koenig, described his daughter as a bright flame in a snowy desert, a girl who from an early age knew how to distinguish the genuine from the fake, saw through people, and knew how to find an approach to them. Samantha had a special softness in her voice that could calm even the most anxious. She grew up in a modest but loving family that valued simple joys, walks on frozen trails, tea parties in the evenings, and conversations until midnight. Like many children in Anchorage, Samantha got used to the cold from an early age, to living surrounded by pine trees and mountains. This strengthened her character. She was not afraid of difficulties and learned to be independent early on. Already in her school years, she worked as a nanny, then got a job as a waitress in a local cafe, and later in a coffee kiosk to help her parents and save up for dreams that seemed quite real. Samantha had a special interest in psychology and the humanities. She wanted to understand how a person works, why people make choices in one direction or another. In her free time, she watched documentaries, read biographies, dreamed of working with people in the future, perhaps becoming a psychotherapist, or opening her own business, where the most important thing would be spiritual warmth. Her dreams were not connected with gloss, fame, or big money. She cared about having real people around so that she could help change someone's life, at least a little. Working at the coffee shop became more than just a job for Samantha. She found a special atmosphere at the Common Grounds kiosk, a place where she could communicate with different people, hear hundreds of stories a day, exchange smiles even on the darkest winter mornings. She loved to greet regular customers by name, knew their tastes, remembered how they liked their coffee, without sugar, with vanilla, with double espresso. This was her stage, her little theater of human feelings, and she coped with this role with incredible warmth. But Samantha's life was not perfect. Like any teenager, there were conflicts, doubts, breakups in her biography. Sometimes she argued with her father, sometimes she felt insecure, sometimes she cried because of relationship failures. But all this was part of her path. And even in difficult moments, she did not lose the light. There was always hope in her voice. One of her friends recalled that Samantha often said, "Everything that makes us angry or upset today will seem like a trifle tomorrow. We just have to live to see tomorrow." Her dreams were not abstract. She wanted to save enough to move, start college, and continue to develop. She was interested in journalism, social work, and sometimes thought about working with young people, helping those who were lost in life. This goal was formed not through books, but through personal experience. She saw how easy it is to take a wrong turn, how difficult it is to be a teenager in a city where winter lasts most of the year, and where loneliness can be especially acute. Samantha's family played a key role in her life. Despite possible conflicts, there was a strong emotional connection between her and her father. He understood his daughter, and she understood him. Her father often said that she was his support, his meaning. He supported her endeavors, worried if she stayed late after work, reminded her of how important it is to be attentive to the world. And although there were misunderstandings between them, as with all parents and teenagers, they had one thing in common: unconditional love. Samantha did not live in a fantasy world. She knew that life is not always fair, that sometimes good people face bad circumstances, but her approach to this was special. If you can't change the world around you, at least change your attitude towards it, she once wrote in her notebook. This maturity, this inner stability, made her not just a teenager, but a person who was ready for adulthood, despite its challenges. She loved listening to music, especially acoustic. She loved walking in the evenings, when the air becomes especially clear. She loved hot chocolate and comfort. She did not need loud parties or fashionable brands. All she needed was the feeling that she was appreciated, that she was doing something important, albeit unnoticed. She was such a person. Modest, quiet, but deep. Those who are rarely shown in films, but who make this world a better place, just by their presence. Samantha's story is the story of a young girl with dreams, doubts, a kind heart, and great potential. A story that in the first 18 years of her life sounded like a confident introduction to an adult, conscious, and meaningful life. Anchorage, Alaska. On the evening of February 1st, 2012, Samantha Koenig finished her shift at the Common Grounds kiosk, where she worked as a barista behind a glass drive-through window. The kiosk, set up on a busy street corner, was her little microcosm. Order after order, cup of coffee, smile, words exchanged. But that evening, despite the familiar routine, something was wrong. The temperature had dropped below -20, and the air was filled with a cold silence. Inside the kiosk, it was warm and smelled of freshly ground coffee. Samantha was wearing her usual uniform, a black sweatshirt, a name tag, her hair pulled back into a ponytail. She served the last of her customers, jokingly wishing them a warm evening, even though she knew how cold it could be in Alaska. Surveillance footage from the kiosk captures the moment a car pulls up to the window. At first glance, it's an ordinary customer. But in a matter of seconds, the situation changes. Samantha leans toward the window, whispers something, then takes a step back, as if she senses the approach of the unknown. The driver of the dark car, his face hidden by a hood and shadow, suddenly breaks into the kiosk. Her hands rise in an instinctive reaction, but no scream sounds. The lights go out, and the footage ends in halftones. At that moment in Anchorage, no one heard it. Neither passers-by nor neighbors. No screams, no attempts to resist. There was only the glass dome of the kiosk, swallowed up by darkness from the inside, and a place where Samantha was not to be found the next morning. In the morning, her father, James Koenig, arrived at his usual place near the entrance to the kiosk. He expected to see his daughter. But instead, silence, frozen, half-open windows, cold tables, the smell of sugar that had lain for several hours and wet coffee. The windows were fogged up, but there was no movement inside. Samantha's phone was silent. A missing person report had been sent to the service in the morning, as soon as it became clear that something was wrong with her. The police arrived an hour later. The officers had an alarming fact in their hands. The girl had not shown up for work the next day, and no one had seen her leave at the usual time. They immediately handed over the memory card of the video camera in front of the car window. The recording could shed light on the disappearance. The first round, the captain of the precinct and 2 officers approached the kiosk. A protective layer of ice slides underfoot. The officer's breath is a white cloud in the cold morning. Inside, everything is in order, as if everything had frozen overnight. The tables are clean, the floor is not dirty. There are no signs of a struggle. At first glance, it is an ordinary workday that has simply stopped. But it is this calm scene that is alarming. The absence of crunching or broken glass. The absence of traces of moisture or bent metal. Evidence not of chaos, but of a precisely planned event. The officers lifted the glass window. It was unbroken. There was no sign of forced entry on the lock. The cameras at the entrance and outside showed that there was no aggressive movement around. No other cars, no witnesses. The last frame of the video camera was a customer's car, then Samantha's face, then a sudden cut to a shot of black emptiness. Those few seconds were the starting point of anxiety. The time of disappearance is a point of intersection. The day ends, the night begins silently, and in that moment, disappearance. Inside the kiosk was her personal coffee, as if freshly made, an order stuck on the counter. Her jacket hung under a stack of cups. The officers photographed every detail, recorded fingerprints on the glass and the handles. But everything looked natural, as if she had simply walked into the hallway and the door slammed behind her. But no door closed behind her. After the police station inspection, time was running out. The city's behavior was changing. Leaflets with Samantha's photo were distributed throughout the neighborhoods. She had become the face of hope. People in stores were asking, "Do you know if she left work on time yesterday?" Journalists with video cameras gathered at the kiosk, filling the air with questions. "When was the last time you saw her?" Her father, his voice shaking, told of that evening. "She smiled at me, probably for the last time in her life." The text accompanied shots of the frozen kiosk at dawn, quiet streets and photographs of her face, printed as a symbol of anxiety. Despite the call of volunteers and friends, despite thousands of calls, messages, retweets, not a single trace of her life. Not a single surveillance camera recorded her movements after she disappeared from the kiosk. Not a single bank transaction, no activity. It was strange and frightening. A person simply disappeared. 10 days passed. 20. Life in Anchorage went on as usual, but with a hint of anxiety. No, with a hint of expectation. The city discussed the cold silence. "If she doesn't show up, what does that mean?" the local announcer asked on air. Periodically, the date on the screen changed. February 2nd, February 3rd. All the dates told the same vague story. The girl disappeared, and no one could explain how and why. A series of days turned into 2 weeks. The family did not give up, but hope was waning, like a rare winter day in Alaska. Father in front of the TV screen, hugs from friends, words of support, all did not bring it back. And when spring came, when the ice on the lakes became thin, when the ice drift opened up the depths of the lakes, it became symbolic. And then, April 2nd, 2012. Divers arrived at Lake Matanuska, the ice on which was still cracking. The air was cold, but it smelled of water and mud. They worked slowly, carefully breaking through the ice. The water beneath was black, the depth seemed bottomless. The day stretched into infinity. After hours of tension, of waiting, what no one wanted to find was finally found. Samantha's body appeared in the icy water, neatly packed, as if it had not been connected with violence, but had been carefully hidden. Divers pulled it out of the water's darkness, and in that moment, the city realized its hopes were turning into bitter reality. The body was not just a sign of the end of a disappearance. It was a sign that Samantha Koenig's story was moving beyond expectations and into a territory where the truth is as inexorable as the ice of a spring lake. After Samantha Koenig's body was pulled from the bottom of Matanuska Lake, the tension that had been simmering in the air for 2 months gave way to a cold determination. This was no longer a missing girl case. It was a murder case. And now that the last illusion had been removed, that all hope was gone, all that was left was the facts. There was science. There was protocol. Federal and local law enforcement agencies, from the Anchorage Police Department to the FBI, were involved in the investigation. The Anchorage County Medical Examiner's Office began by thoroughly examining the body pulled from the bottom of Matanuska Lake. Even though the body had been in the water for weeks, and the cold temperatures had slowed biological processes, the examiners were able to extract enough information, The initial conclusion was that death had occurred shortly after Samantha's disappearance. Edema, the lack of evidence of prolonged hypothermia, and the degree of rigor mortis were consistent with an early post-mortem period, coinciding with February 1st or 2nd. The experts did not record any signs of struggle on her hands or face, which indicated limited resistance. Samantha was probably threatened with a weapon or in a state of psychological shock. Particular attention was paid to external and internal signs that allowed the exact cause of death to be established. Doctors ruled out accidental death, suicide, and most natural factors. Despite the absence of pronounced hematomas or fractures, several traces indicated mechanical impact, most likely produced with restrained use of force. The final conclusion is murder with the use of external pressure, incompatible with life. In addition, morgue employees confirmed, after death, the body was carefully processed. Hair combed, clothes changed, nails trimmed, actions that cannot be explained by chance. This led investigators to the idea. The criminal controlled everything down to the smallest detail, strove for a certain setting even after the crime. Chemical-toxicological examination ruled out the influence of drugs, alcohol, or sedatives. Samantha was conscious at the time of the attack, meaning she was aware of what was happening. This added weight to the tragedy. She understood what was happening to her, but had no way to save herself. The girl died almost immediately after she disappeared. All this time she was not on the run, not in captivity. She was dead, quiet, cold, under the ice, and the whole story, which had begun to be built on guesses and hopes, fell apart. This discovery radically changed the direction of the investigation. The disappearance, which was initially considered a possible escape or kidnapping for ransom, now became a clearly planned and executed crime. Investigators started from the very beginning, from the kiosk where Samantha worked on the night of the disappearance. All the CCTV footage was reviewed. The discovered fragment with a person getting inside was cleaned up, improved, analyzed. The silhouette was blurred, but the movements were too confident. The person knew what he was doing. What was particularly interesting was the fact that there were no visible signs of violence in the kiosk. Not a single sound of a struggle, not a single blow. Samantha, judging by the video, had complied. This meant that the attacker had acted under psychological pressure, perhaps with a weapon, perhaps with a threat to a third party. Investigators carefully examined whether there had been similar cases in recent months, but nothing provided direct leads. Meanwhile, while the pathologist continued to work, another lead led the police in an unexpected direction. Samantha's father reported that almost 2 weeks after she disappeared, he and his family received a text message from her phone. It said that Samantha was alive, that she was fine, and that she needed money. Reading it now, investigators saw it as an elaborate deception. But at the time, it became the reason for the subsequent ransom payment. The attacker demanded that the money be wired to Samantha's bank account. This decision was his first mistake. Bank transactions leave a digital trail. Every withdrawal can be tracked, and the police knew it. They contacted the bank, froze the card, and then turned on tracking for all future transactions. And the card began to live a life of its own. The first withdrawal occurred in Anchorage, then in Arizona, then in New Mexico, finally in Texas. The route of travel formed an almost straight line along the route of Interstate 10. At each location where money was withdrawn, there were ATMs with cameras nearby. The images were not always clear, but you could see it. The same man, wearing a hat and dark glasses, approaching the ATM and withdrawing amounts that did not exceed the limit. He knew what he was doing. He wanted to remain unnoticed. But he left fingerprints. He left a shadow. The FBI brought in special analytical teams. Behavioral analysis, digital forensics, financial profiling. Every bill withdrawn, every step along the route became part of the mosaic. The suspect was driving a white Ford Focus. This car was seen on several surveillance cameras linked to ATMs. Mailings to regions of the southwest of the country quickly yielded results. In Lufkin, Texas, a local patrol recorded a white car matching the description. The officers decided to pull the driver over, a routine document check, a simple conversation. But inside was Samantha's phone, her debit card, and cash. And the driver seemed too calm, too prepared. the name on the documents, Israel Case. At first glance, he did not arouse suspicion. He lived in Anchorage, had no serious criminal record, owned a small construction business. But what was in his car could not be explained by chance. In addition to Samantha's card and phone, he had used tickets, cash in rubber bands from bank stacks, and maps with a route through the south of the country. In the trunk, a mask, ropes, plastic zip ties, fragments of clothing. After the arrest, Case did not show aggression. He was cold, collected, attentive. His behavior did not resemble fear. It resembled a pre-planned scenario. He did not resist, did not ask unnecessary questions. He was simply prepared. This was alarming. He was taken back to Alaska. Investigators began to study his house, land, barn. It was there, in one of the detached buildings in the backyard, that traces were found that would later become key evidence. Forensic officers in white suits examined every square meter. Traces of biological fluids were found under the floorboards. Some walls were re-sewn, as if someone was hiding what was happening behind them. On the shelves, canisters, plastic bags, duct tape, tools. In the corner is a freezer. At the same time, investigators began working with the digital media seized from Case. Among the files on the laptop and flash drives were images, documents, and draft letters. One of them was a file containing a scanned photo of Samantha, taken a few days after her disappearance. The details of this image were not officially disclosed, but investigators confirmed that the photo was taken after the girl's death. It was used as part of a deception, part of a cold, calculating plan. The investigation grew in layers. With each passing week, more evidence, more information, more facts that went beyond one crime appeared. But the question still remained. How to explain such preparation? Why did Case, who had no previous criminal record, end up involved in such a complex, almost professional scheme? Investigators had a premonition. This was not the first time, and perhaps not the only one. They began to study his movements. They used geolocation data, bank reports, airline tickets. It became clear. He traveled around the country frequently, without an apparent goal, without an escort. He rented cars in different states, paid for hotels in cash, often leaving no digital trace. His routes did not coincide with business trips. They coincided with the geography of disappearances and unsolved cases. But for now, the investigation is focused on one case, the case of Samantha Koenig. The end of the investigation phase was recorded at the moment when investigators, prosecutors, and FBI experts prepared a complete package of evidence: photos, videos, financial transactions, digital traces, testimony, autopsy results, evidence from the crime scene. All this formed a complete picture. Dark, heavy, but now, irrefutable. The next step will be what everyone was waiting for: a trial. When Israel Case's name became known to the general public, everything about this case took on new contours. Until that moment, he was just a suspect, with a long shadow, complete silence, and suspicious precision in his actions. But after the arrest and the release of some of the evidence, public attention switched to one question. Who, in fact, was this man? And what was hiding behind the external calm? Case did not ask for a lawyer right away. He spent the first hours after his arrest in a solitary cell, without hysteria, without words. Only after a day did he speak, not with despair, but rather with controlled coldness. He demanded that only FBI agents speak to him. He did not want petty jurisdiction. He knew that there was more to him than just one case. The agents, including specialized behavioral analysts, began a series of interrogations. Methodically, step by step. They did not raise their voices, did not apply pressure. They let the silence work for them. Case spoke. And what he began to tell went far beyond the disappearance of Samantha Koenig. He confessed to the kidnapping. In a confessional, calm tone, without a trace of emotion, he described how he had watched the kiosk in advance, how he had studied Samantha's schedule, how he had waited for the right evening. He described how he had entered and forced her to submit. He claimed that he had acted alone, and although many of the details sounded like scenes from a crime novel, they were confirmed by the evidence he had collected. Case went further. He confessed to the murder, without pathos, without drama. He said that he did not want to be caught, that this was not the first, and perhaps not the last, and that he wanted to leave behind order, not chaos. This was not just a criminal. This was a man for whom control was the only form of existence. He admitted that after Samantha's death, he hid her body in a freezer in his barn and later took her to the lake, where he carefully chose the location and secured her body under the ice. Everything was calculated. Even the attempt to divert the investigation, sending messages in her name, a photograph, a false demand for money, was carefully planned. But the oddities didn't end there. Case claimed to be a traveling killer, that he had kits, buried caches scattered across the country containing tools, weapons, evidence, and transportation. It became clear to authorities that they were dealing with a man who had been plotting crimes for decades without leaving a digital footprint. The Alaska court system found itself in an unusual position. On the one hand, prosecutors had a proven killer with a full record of evidence. On the other, they had a man willing to cooperate, but only on his own terms. He didn't want a public trial. He wanted complete autonomy. He refused lawyers, wanted to avoid a jury, and insisted on confidentiality. His motivation was not vindication, but control. The prosecutors began preparing for the hearing. They needed to ensure a rock-solid legal foundation, despite Case's confessions. Testimony obtained outside of court could be challenged. So every word had to be documented. Investigators re-interviewed witnesses, reviewed video footage, compared GPS data, transactions, analyzed evidence found in the barn and car. Everything about Samantha's body, from the condition of her clothes to the microscopic marks on her skin, was included in the overall case. Every detail formed a chain that closed on only one person: Israel Case. Meanwhile, court-appointed lawyers tried to establish whether their client was sane. A psychological examination confirmed that Case was fully aware of his actions. He showed no signs of disorders that interfere with the understanding of criminal responsibility. Moreover, experts noted his high level of cognitive organization, memory, attention to detail, and lack of empathy. Signs characteristic of narcissistic and antisocial personality traits, but not psychosis. During a closed preliminary hearing, Case told the court that he did not want to drag out the process. He confirmed, he committed a crime, he is guilty. But even here he was trying to dictate terms. In exchange for full confessions in other cases, he demanded that he be executed as soon as possible. He didn't want prison life. He didn't want to wait. He wanted to finish it the way he started it, his way. This put prosecutors in a difficult position. At the time, Alaska didn't have the death penalty, but because Case admitted to committing crimes in other states, including Texas and New York, where the death penalty is possible, the case became federal. The FBI put the transfer on hold to complete a full investigation into Samantha. But it became clear, Israel Case was not just a killer. He was a predator who hid in plain sight, moving across the country, committing meticulously planned crimes. Samantha's trial was supposed to begin in 2013, but it never happened. In December 2012, in his solitary confinement cell at the Anchorage Correctional Facility, Israel Case committed suicide. He left behind a note covered in strange poems and phrases, many of which made no sense. Blood was found on the walls of his cell where he had used his drawings. On his desk were pages of symbols and undecipherable diagrams. He left without revealing all he knew. However, despite his death, the Alaskan court concluded the formal trial. Based on confessions, evidence, expert opinions, and the findings of the prosecutor's office, the court formally found Israel Case guilty of kidnapping and murdering Samantha Koenig in June 2013. The sentence was life imprisonment without parole, formally handed down after the defendant's death. It was more an act of legal confirmation than punishment, but it was necessary, both for Samantha's family and for justice. The story ended not in the courtroom, but in a cell. But the truth was established. The trial became not only a legal, but also a human finale to a tragedy that began on a dark night in a coffee kiosk.